I start my day every day by reading the West Australian newspaper. And today there was 72 pages and I read the paper in about 45 minutes. Do you think that I can remember everything that was in the newspaper? And did I really read every word in the newspaper? And of course the answer is no, I didn't read every word in the paper. And I remember 2 or 3 articles, key articles within that paper. Some research from Stanford University tells us that on average, people will remember 10% of what you've said a week after attending a presentation, a seminar or a workshop. So good morning everyone, Peter Dew's my name, and I want to talk to you about how to open your presentation. And indeed, opening your presentation is one of the ways that we increase retention, we increase the power of our message, we increase the relevance of what we're saying to the audience. So Peter Dew's my name, I'm a public speaker, trainer and coach, and I specialise in helping people present effectively, confidently, share their ideas, share their messages. Those of you who haven't attended one of my webinars before, just how to participate, ask questions. You've got both the chat box and the Q&A box available. Put your comments in the chat. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box and I will address those as we go. Take notes, but also I record this webinar, so this webinar is being recorded and the replay is made available to all attendees. So if I gloss over something or you want to revisit it, the recording is available to you. Participate, put in your comments, ask questions. And I think the most important thing is try and apply some of the information. This webinar is very specific. So in terms of application, how might you start your next presentation? How may you start the next meeting, the next seminar that you lead? And further down the track, when we get face-to-face, how might you start your next face-to-face presentation? Why open strong? Why does it matter? There's a behavioural organisational psychology principle called the rule of primacy. Apparently, and research has shown, according to behavioural psychologists, the first words we say tend to stick. They tend to remember. So people remember that first interaction. And we've heard those sayings, first impressions count. You've only got people judge you in the first 7 seconds and you've only got 5 seconds to make a first good impression. So the rule of primacy is that first words matter. So think of this as valuable real estate in any presentation, any verbal interaction, communication. So that's why they matter. I mentioned Stanford University says that you only remember 10% of what people say. So make those first words very valuable. And the metaphor or I guess the thing that I use to capture this is around, it's like reading the headlines of the newspaper. I mentioned the West Australian newspaper has 72 pages and I read it from front to cover. But if the headline doesn't interest me, I turn the page. If your first 30 seconds, your first 60 seconds doesn't have impact, I may go to my phone, check my Facebook feed. I may start thinking about what I'm going to cook for dinner. I might just zone out. So I just want to encourage you to start thinking about those first 30 to 60 seconds. It can be longer, but the first words you have, make them really powerful so that people sit up and take notice and understand they're in the right room, they're in the right seminar for the topic you're speaking upon. Milo Frank wrote a little book, How to Get Your Message Across in 30 Seconds. You may have seen TV commercials. They used to be 30 seconds. They're now down to about 15 seconds. A full story, an engaging story, a call to action occurs in a TV commercial, a radio commercial. They're all 12, 15, no more than 30 seconds. Even the news, the ABC News, the Channel 10 News, the Cross, the story's about 30 seconds. So the journalist in the studio will introduce the story, maybe 10 seconds. Then they'll cross, welcome Harry. Then they'll cross to the live cross and interview someone at the scene of the accident, at the scene of the event, and they'll speak to them for about 10 or 12 seconds, and then they'll cross back to the studio, and the journalist, the anchor in the TV studio will sum up, and it's 30 seconds for a story. So it is called the rule of primacy. It helps people remember what you've said, and apparently we are more likely to remember that first 30 to 60 seconds. So that's why you start strong. It is indeed like reading news headlines. Mind you, many people don't read newspapers nowadays, but think of some other, as you're going through your Facebook feed, it's the headline that decides whether you're going to read the entire article or just gloss over. So that's why we start strong. I'll just move on with some common openings that I feel perhaps don't do you justice. So housekeeping. Can I get everyone to turn your mobile phones off? We'll have morning tea at 10:30. The toilets are down the back, females to the right, male to the left. The agenda for the day. So we've got 5 points I want to cover in the day. We're going to go through this, then this, then this, then this. These are what I call soft openings. They're not capturing my attention and creating relevance for my problem, my issue as an audience member. Oh, thank you all for coming today. I know some of you have travelled a long way, and I really appreciate you giving up your time to attend this webinar. So that's a nice, polite introduction. Please understand, I'm not saying don't do housekeeping. I'm not saying don't do the agenda. I'm not saying thank people. What I'm saying is before that, create the relevance. And other information that kind of fails to capture attention, create relevance, engage me. And I've got one final question for you. When should you acknowledge the traditional landowners? So if I was doing a face-to-face presentation today, I would be acknowledging the Noongar people of Perth, the Whadjuk people, the traditional landowners, and I would pay my respects to past, present and emerging custodians. If I was in Bendigo, it would be the Dja Dja Wurrung people. When should that be my opening? All right, Steve said, if you've got Aboriginal, Indigenous people in the room. Yeah, look, I've checked this one with some Aboriginal health workers in Perth, and as long as I acknowledge the traditional landowners, they're really quite happy, and I do it very early on. At the bigger seminars where you have a welcome to country by an elder, generally the MC will stand up, set the scene, create relevance, and then step back and welcome the elder on stage, and then you'll have the tradition welcome to country. I think if you can do your opening in 30 seconds, and then before I go on, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners. So I think it is okay, as long as it's fairly early on, to start with the relevant opening, the rule of primacy, get the message out. Before we move on, I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners. So thanks for that, Steve. All right, so here's the first strategy. Ask a rhetorical question. Ask a question that requires the audience to think. What would you do if this was you? How are you going to start your next presentation? Just by asking that rhetorical question, you can get people thinking. What is the problem that you face when you get on a stage and start public speaking? What's your biggest problem? Good morning, my name's Peter Dew, and as a public speaking coach, the answer to that question is most frequently, how do I control nerves? How do I deal with my fear? How do I come across more confidently? So what question can you ask that puts people in the right mindset so that they start to think about what they would, how they would answer it and how this is going to apply to them? Be controversial. Say something that catches people by surprise. You can even be contrarian. Say something that you know is going to make people sit up, take notice, maybe even get angry. You've got your attention, and then you're going to move into that particular content. It could be that, and when I talk about generating electricity, and on the East Coast, they have blackouts. They don't have enough electricity. So we clearly need to go to nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is the way forward for Australia. It is our future. You can imagine that probably 70%, my estimates, 70 to 80% of the people in the room are so against nuclear energy. Why would you do that, Peter? It's dangerous. What do we do with the waste product? We know about Fukushima. We know about Chernobyl in the Ukraine. Why would you talk about nuclear energy? All right. What are we going to do to address our energy problems? So what's your controversial, maybe a little bit contrarian, that lets people know what we're going to talk about, gets them engaged, maybe metaphorically smacks them around the chops, makes them sit up and take notice? Any thoughts on that? Any comments around something you could say? Have you ever seen anyone start controversial? All right, thanks. Yeah, Sarah said she was at a, thanks for your comment, Sarah. Sarah was at a not-for-profit, and they were struggling to get to fill their committee. And at the annual general meeting, one person moved that they abandon the not-for-profit organisation. It is no longer relevant, shut it down and give the money to another charity. I've seen similar, I must admit. And well, did people get angry, and did, in my case, did we then fill the committee? Yeah, be controversial. Yeah, thanks, Steve. You can be contrarian, and then without agreeing with it. You don't have to take an opposing view just to get people get people angry to get people engaged and that be your view. So you can adopt that contrarian view and then flip and go back to, well, the alternative is that we need to do something else to generate energy to be able to secure our energy future. All right. Make an eye-catching or gut-wrenching statement. This can be anything that makes people think. And I'm going to talk about statistics later on, but one that I'm remembering at the moment is that Aboriginal people represent 3.3% of the population of Australia. That's the First Nations, the Indigenous people, 3.3%, and they represent 29% of people locked up in our prisons, in our prison system. 3.3% of our population represents 29% of those people incarcerated. So that kind of grabs me. So what eye-catching statement, gut-wrenching statement can you make? I was reading something about climate change, and they were saying we've got 50 years. We've got a window of 50 years to turn this around. Then we've hit that tipping point where there is no going back. Use a relevant and powerful quote. The quote can be memorable, it can grab attention, it can also build your credibility. So in the area that I work in, overcoming fear of public speaking, one of the quotes I use to start a presentation, or sometimes during a presentation, is that of Mark Twain. And Mark Twain said there's two kinds of speakers in this universe. Those that are nervous and those that are bloody liars. So what I take from that, from Mark Twain, is that everyone has nerves when they get on stage, when they get in front of a group of people, when they decide to lead a Zoom webinar. So it's about understanding that these nerves are normal, and if you don't have nerves, you're probably a liar, or you're not treating your audience with the due respect they require. In terms of aged care, I do some work with Advocare in West Australia. One of the statistics they use is that right now in Western Australia, there's 15,000 people over the age of 65 experiencing elder abuse. That's 15,000 of our aunties, our uncles, our grandparents, our parents that right now are being abused. That means they're not living the life they want to live. The food they would normally eat is being denied. They're being walked in on in their nursing home without the courtesy of someone knocking. Their money is being misused by their carers, by their adult children, by their guardians. 15,000 over the age of 65, any one moment, every day in West Australia experiencing elder abuse. Then I can step down into my talk. So good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Dew. I am from Advocare WA. Today I'm going to talk about agenda. A little bit of housekeeping. Can I get you to turn your mobile phones off? Please no video recording. So you can still do all those things, but what's the statistic that grabs attention? I was watching a video from Harvard yesterday around gender differences. And while over 50% of women Over 50% of graduates from universities and colleges are female. I think 52% of graduates are female, 48% are male. And while over 50% of the workforce is now female, so that seems like gender equality, the pay gap is still significant. And so Harvard did some research when that pay gap will become equal. And it's going to take, at the current rate of change, it'll be 200 years before women get pay equality with men. That is, get paid the same as men for doing the same work. Remember the rule of primacy? You remember these things? How do I remember that video from Harvard that I saw a while back? How do I remember that workshop that I attended in Advocare where they told me that 15,000 West Australians over the age of 65, you're creating those powerful hooks. This is why it's valuable real estate. Just going to pause for a moment. Any questions? Any comments? So Harry, Violet, haven't heard from you. Any comments? Just type in the chat or Q&A. And the thing with statistics, it needs to be relevant, then needs to lead into what you're going to talk about. The statistic can be used to highlight or bring to the fore the problem that you want to talk about, and then you may have the solutions in your presentation. All right, moving on. Tell a story. One of the things that in the training, public speaking field, one of the things that we let people know is that people don't remember much of what you've said. They remember how you make them feel. So in telling a story, if you take people on a bit of an emotional roller coaster, if you show people that at the end of the day they can do this, there's light at the end of the tunnel, they can see a way forward. And with the Harvard article, the Harvard video around gender, Belinda Gates has a plan, and this plan is going to fast track the process and try and get gender equality by 2030. So instead of 200 years, they're going to try and achieve it in 10 years in the United States. And so Harry's late arrival, that's okay. And Violet, the importance of having structure. Thanks for those remarks. And Harry, it's fine. This is recorded so you can go back and watch. I think it was only the introduction, the first 5 minutes. So the importance of having structure in your presentation. And in fact, yeah, most presentations have a beginning, a middle and an end. And this is all I'm talking about, the beginning. So I'm suggesting you elevate the beginning to something that's really powerful, and I'm sharing with you those different ways. So tell a story that creates hope. Tell a story that shares overcoming adversity, and then you're going to go through the steps. So for me, in my public speaking workshops, as a person who stutters, I have feared, I have avoided, I have done everything for most of my life to not public speak. I've worked really hard to deal with my fear, to control my stutter. I still stutter. And using that story at the start of a presentation shows other people that may be fearing and struggling with public speaking that there is a way that they can do it. If I, as a person who stutters, can take on public speaking, they've got a really good chance of success in their own lives. Then we go into 5 steps of how to become more confident, how to structure a speech, use of the platform, a whole range of other things, but they've got in their heart, they know that they can also do public speaking. So thanks for those comments. Paint a picture of the future, the way forward, a bleak future. Climate change, we've got about 50 years, so we start with a statistic. Unless we do something. Or just imagine a world where everyone was treated equal. At the moment, we've got Black Lives Matter. And so by painting that rosy picture and then going through 5 key steps to achieve that picture, you can create relevance and have that memorable opening. And as I alluded to, start with some amazing statistics. I've shared a few with you. 15,000 West Australians over the age of 65 experience elder abuse. 90% of Australians retire without achieving their income, the lifestyle that they hope to achieve in retirement. That's 9 out of 10 of you on this webinar. You will not achieve the retirement lifestyle you hoped, you dreamed, you planned to achieve. 9 out of 10, 90%. Good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Dew and I'm a financial planner, and I want to talk to you about 7 strategies to make sure you retire with the lifestyle, the income that you wish to achieve. Whatever statistic you're going to use to create relevance. With most presentations, in a week's time, people only remember 10% of what you said. That means 90% of what you said is forgotten, the same as the newspaper that I read. How can you make your presentation more impactful? So just a question. I've shared with you 7 strategies to start a presentation. I've encouraged you to avoid "good morning everyone, my name's Peter Dew, it's a real pleasure to be here. Can you turn off your phones?" The housekeeping. How might you, with the 7, and I'll just come through to the summary. How might you start your next presentation? Ask a rhetorical question. Be a little bit controversial. Make an eye-catching, ear-catching, gut-wrenching statement. Use a relevant quote. Tell a story. Paint a picture. Which of these 7 strategies I've shared with you, there are others, may you be able to use to create relevance? And Steve said he'd like to tell a story, but he's worried that it goes on too long. Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. I'll mention that in a moment. And be controversial. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. So with stories, I do run webinars on storytelling. I do run workshops on storytelling. A good story. And remember I mentioned the TV commercials, they are a full story. You can do them within 30 seconds, but a good story should be around 1 to 2 minutes 30. And with a story, you may have your whole, my story of being a person who stutters. It's just the little bit that you use to introduce. And what you can do is you can layer the story during the presentation. So let me tell you a little bit more about the biggest issue I faced as a person who stutters with public speaking and how I overcame that. And then there's another lesson there. So you can weave your story and unfold more of your story around your 4 or 5 points, your 5 pillars to success, your 7 strategies to achieve what you want to achieve. Thanks, Violet. Rhetorical questions to start with. Yeah. So stories, there's an art to storytelling. The story should be provocative. The story should illustrate the point where you're going to lead them to. The mistake that people make with telling stories is they make themselves the hero of the story. And I hear this with Olympic champions, sporting champions, with cricketers. They say how they achieved their success, how hard they had to work, and the mind saying, that's really nice, what's in it for me? So thank you for those comments. Just a quick summary of upcoming seminars. We've got a paid seminar on the 16th of June, How to Overcome Nerves and Fear of Public Speaking. This is my real strength in helping people with their public speaking. This is a paid seminar, only goes for 45 minutes, and tips to create a memorable message. So this is another tool to make you be more memorable. The opening matters, but what else can you do to make your message stick? That's a free webinar on 22nd of June. There'll be 2 other webinars in July. Workshops, we're doing some online workshops now. You'll find all of these on our websites: Overcoming Self-Doubt, Difficult Conversations, Winning Presentation Skills. In Perth, we're back face-to-face. How to Have Difficult Conversations, 24th of June. Off the Cuff, 25th of June. Assertiveness, 26th. And Presentation Skills, 30th of June. And then a couple of online workshops in July. So remember, first 30 seconds matters. How are you going to start your next presentation? You're going to ask a question, use some statistics, be controversial, paint a picture of what could be of possibility. Whatever you use to start, can I encourage you to shy away from those housekeeping, thanks for coming type of comments being the first words you say. You still need to be polite. You need to be politically correct. You need to welcome people. You need to go through your agenda, but leave that for 5 minutes into your presentation. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your comments. And Steve, your last remark, yes, different strokes for different folks, depending on your audience, and you may not want to be controversial in a group of lawyers or accountants, but there are other groups that you need to be controversial, so match your opening to your audience.